Hello and welcome as always. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on when you're watching the video. Although, as high school kids, I imagine nighttime is probably the most likely option for most of you. We're going to continue looking at elections here in America. And again, we've covered some different things within elections, right? We've covered political parties. We've covered who can vote. We talked a little bit about restrictions on people that were trying to vote. So again, we're just kind of building on these ideas when it comes to elections. Now, some of this is going to be slightly familiar to us, having already covered like the executive branch and presidential elections, but there are still lots of things about elections that I think are worth covering and making sure we understand. So the first thing is just simply the way our elections are designed are meant to accomplish three things, right? One would be to keep elections free. Because the second that you charge, even if it's a small amount of money, the second you charge money, you're automatically diminishing the number of people that are able to vote. The next two are making them honest and making them accurate, right? People are not going to participate in an election if they don't think they're honest. If they think that the results of the election are already predetermined, why would I waste my time going out to vote? And it goes to accurate, right? We need to know that every vote is being counted, right? The government says this person had 1 million votes and this person had 1,000,001. Well, that's pretty close election. Are you sure you counted all the votes? Did you count all the votes? Well, so again, making sure those things are in place allow us as voters to feel comfortable and confident going out and actually voting. Now, the thing to keep in mind when it comes to rules or laws about voting in America is that most of them are at the state and local level. While obviously we think of like the major elections, right? Voting for president, voting for senator, voting for House member. In America, there are over 500,000 people who have their job because they won an election. Okay, so again, 500,000 people in America have their job because they won an election. How many of those people work in the federal government? We got one president. We have 535 people in Congress. That's it. So the other 499,500, right? We do our math right there. Those are all state people or local people or county people or township people. So the vast majority of laws are based on those types of elections. You have way more laws about elections when it comes to Hancock County than you do about like the federal elections in America, because there's literally people being elected in Hancock County just as regularly or arguably more often than we see at the federal level. Okay, but the federal government is in charge of 4 specific things when it comes to elections. So I do want to highlight those. So the first one is that Congress is in charge of figuring out when the elections are going to happen. So they have the power to fix the times, places, and manners of holding elections for members of Congress. Okay, so when do we have federal elections in America? It's a very specific day. Okay, so one, we wanted to make sure that we never had elections on Sundays. It's kind of this separation of church and state. So let's say you do want to have your elections in November. If you just picked November 4th, again, the calendar is always shifting, right? November 4th would eventually be a Sunday. So you can't just pick a day on the calendar if you want to avoid Sundays. Okay, so you could do it easier and just say, well, fine, then like the first Monday of the month, right? That's obviously never going to be on a Sunday. The other issue they're trying to avoid is they didn't want elections to be the first day of the month, because back in the day, that's when people got paid. And they didn't want people's paycheck to influence how they voted, right? Like if your paycheck was a little bit lower, you're like, I hate everything, and you go to vote, right? Or if your paycheck's a little bit higher, you're like, I love everything, I go vote. So they didn't want it to be on Sundays, and they didn't want it to be manipulated by when people got paid. Okay, so we want to have elections in November. We don't want them on a Sunday, and we don't want them on the first day of the month. So what solution did we come up with? Federal elections in America happen on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. Okay, so they're always going to be on a Tuesday, which obviously avoids the Sunday thing. How do we make sure they're not the first day of the month when people might be getting paid? Because there has to have been a Monday in November prior. So the earliest you could have an election would be November 2nd. So Monday would be November 1, Tuesday would be November 2. The latest you could have that election would be November 8th. So if the first day of the month was November 1st and it was on a Tuesday, that one wouldn't be election day because there wasn't a Monday before it. You'd have to wait a whole another week. So it'd be November 8th. So sometime between November 2 and November 8 is when we have federal elections. So again, first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. Additionally, the power to set the time for choosing presidential electors, setting the date for casting those electoral votes. We know that happens in December. And then regulating certain aspects of presidential elections, like having secret ballots, using voting machines, protecting rights of voters, making sure people have access to voting, regulating campaign finance. So again, there are some things that the federal government is involved in when it comes to elections. But again, the vast majority of those things are going to be more state or local laws. All right. And again, when I talk about, federal elections being on that first Tuesday after the first Monday, everything else is on the ballot then too. So it's not like that you're only voting for federal stuff because that is the number one day people go out to vote. They just go ahead and put everything on the ballot at that point in time. So again, it is the date of federal elections. It's also the day for state elections and county elections and local elections and all that jazz too, right? Now, there are some options. Let's say you know you're going to be out of town on that day. You're a voter. You want to vote. I know I'm not going to be in town on that specific day. What are my options? One is absentee voting. What is absentee voting? It is simply voting on paper ahead of time, right? You simply request an absentee ballot. They mail it to you. You fill it out. You mail it back. All right. So again, it is literally that simple. Now, it was originally intended to help people that maybe were physically disabled, like I can't leave my house, I'm on a U.S. military base, I'm a college student, like I'm registered to vote somewhere, but I am not going to be in that location on that day. Or I'm registered to vote, but I don't have the physical ability to leave my house, my, hospital bed, right? Like there might be a physical. Now today, though, they don't care. You don't have to say why. You don't have to justify it. You can just say, I want an absentee ballot. And I can tell you personally, I've used absentee ballots as more often than I voted in person. All right, I just simply request the absentee ballot. They mail it to me. I fill it out whenever I want to. I just have to return it by the date of the election. It makes life much more simpler for me, not having to worry about doing something on that specific day. Now, how often are people doing this? Is this common? 2020 presidential election, 65 million people requested absentee ballots. By 2024, that number was over 80 million. So yes, a lot of people do it. It is becoming more popular. I think it really took off in 2020 because of COVID. People genuinely didn't want to leave their house. So again, people did it then like, oh, that was really easy. And so even more people do it in 2024. And again, it's a great way too if you are someone who isn't necessarily confident when you go to vote, because now you have the ballot. And you can just, sit down, relax, have a cup of coffee, go to the internet, Google all of the people, Google all their positions. Whereas if you go in person, right, they give you the ballot, you go in a booth, you vote. Like you kind of have to know what you're doing there. That way you're not taking forever. With absentee voting, you have an entire month, essentially, that you can vote. So again, certainly becoming more popular as we go. Again, there could be some potential flaws there that we can highlight. But again, this is certainly an option if you're not going to be around on election day. I pointed out when I originally registered to vote here in Hancock County, I went off to college up at BG. I didn't want to drive home. I just got an absentee ballot. Nowadays, I mostly just do it because it's just kind of a simple way to vote. So again, if you like voting, if you think voting is worthwhile, this is definitely an easy way to make that happen. So just some other numbers. We're going to talk about in-person voting here in a second. But again, the number of people that voted in 2024 before the actual election. So that first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. So we mentioned about 80 million absentee ballots. There was another 8 million people that voted early. And we'll talk about what that is in a minute. But that means 88 million people voted in the country before Election Day even happened. And about 2.5 of those were from Ohio. Okay, so it is a really easy, if someone ever tells you, I didn't have time to vote, they're not being accurate. Like you might not have time on election day. I can get that to some extent, but you have absentee options. You have early person voting options. And again, 88 million people were able to do it. Now, are there any potential downsides? Yes, right? One, if you're voting days or maybe weeks before the actual election, what happens if something crazy occurs, right? A news story breaks. This person turns out they're a really terrible person, or literally with the people we keep running for president, they're really old. Maybe one of them dies. You don't get your vote back. You can't go back and be like, yeah, I'd like to change my vote. It's over. Like once you turn it in, that's going to be it. So again, there are the potential like curveballs that could occur. But again, if you're confident, you know how you're voting, yeah, you can go ahead and get that vote in before election day even occurs. And this is what I meant by early voting, right? Now, this is back from 2018, but the hours are still the same. So you have that election occurring in November, right? A month earlier, and this is just an Ohio thing. Every state's a little bit different, but this is in Ohio. A month earlier, you can start voting. And you'll see they're open Monday through Friday. All right. Sometimes they're even open on Saturdays or Sundays. So again, if you are a person who is genuinely busy during the week, you know you are not going to be around in that day in November. You can vote absentee. You can vote early. Sometimes they're open early. Sometimes they're open late. Again, Ohio genuinely tries to give you the chance to vote. So again, if you're ever talking to someone like, well, I just didn't have time to vote, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. If you don't want to vote, that's fine. I don't care if you vote or not, but don't ever say you didn't have time to vote, because between absentee and early person and the day of, like, there are so many ways in which you can vote. Now, the one downside to the early voting is there's only one location in the entire county you can go to in order to vote. So here in Hancock County, you have to go to 201 East Lincoln Street. That is the only place you can vote. Now, on election day, right, if you wait until that day in November, there would be lots of places around town closer to you that you could go vote. We talked about like your precinct where you're assigned to go vote. Those places aren't open every single one of those days, right? It's only that one location on election day. All those other places would be open. So again, we talked a little bit about, voting location. Here you go, right? So precinct. So a voting district is the smallest geographic unit of the conduction of elections, right? So again, cities are divided into wards. Wards are divided into precincts. Everyone in that precinct is going to go to the same location to vote. So maybe an elementary school, a fire station, community center, wherever it is your parents go. And again, where you physically go to vote is called a polling place, right? So again, somewhere in or near that precinct that everyone is assigned to go to vote. Now, when Ohio has elections, we keep our voting polling places open for 13 hours. We open them at 6:30 in the morning. They do not close until 7:30 at night. And if you are in line at 7:30, they can't kick you out. If you're in line by 7:30, they have to let you vote, which means many years they're open for another 30, 40 minutes, making sure everyone gets that opportunity to vote. So it kind of goes back to what I mentioned. If someone tells you they didn't have time to vote, very few people are busy for 13 straight hours in a day, much less the absentee, much less the the early voting. So again, Ohio really goes out of its way to make sure that you have the opportunity to vote. Now, along with voting, when you vote, it will be done in private. There is nothing that will ever say, Mr. Schoonover voted this way. When you fill out your ballot, you don't put any identifying markers on that ballot. You simply fill it out, you turn it in, the votes are counted. Now, would the county keep track of who showed up to vote? Yes. And there are records there, like how often did Mr. Schoonover show up to vote? But there will literally be nothing there that says how you or anyone else has ever voted. So if someone says, well, I know how you voted. No, they don't. Again, maybe because you told them, or maybe because they're just making a guess based on your political philosophy, but no one will ever know how you actually have voted. Now, that has not always been the case in America. Originally, voting was done viva voce, which is just Latin for out loud. So literally, you would just walk and be like, I'm voting for Timmy, I'm voting for Johnny, I'm voting for Sarah. And then everyone in the community would be able to hear who you were voting for. Again, there was just a guy there kind of keeping little tallies as to who everyone was voting for. Now, obviously, that goes away. People like to vote in private. People don't want everyone and their neighbor to know how they're voting. So most ballots in America are what we call an office group ballot. So when you physically get your ballot, the people will be grouped together by the office they're running for. So again, it'll say president, everyone running for president, senator, everyone running for senator. Again, we can see our little example down here. Originally, they just put the names alphabetically just to like keep it fair. But then people argued that wasn't fair because if your last name started with an A, you were always first. And like, again, some people who vote who don't really care might just be like, oh, their name's first or their name's first. So now they just scramble. It is just a random order of names of people running for those positions. But again, when you vote, you're most likely to see an office group ballot. Again, it'll just say the position. It'll say everyone running for that position. So again, maybe a little advantage there if your name is consistently first. Now, originally, we just had people vote on paper, right? You like and mark, you turn your paper and someone counts it. But that can be very slow. Mistakes can be made. So now we're going to move into automation, right? We're going to have machines count the vote. You literally go into a booth, you pull a lever. All right. Timmy lever, Johnny lever. I pulled the Timmy lever. I pulled the Johnny, like whatever one it is that you're going to vote for. And there's two major reasons why these voting machines can be very helpful, right? One is speed. The machine is literally counting. Now, again, If you're some small voting area that's going to have a couple hundred people vote, could you count a couple hundred ballots? Yeah. If you're the United States and you're talking about counting hundreds of millions of ballots, you're going to do that by hand? Like, no, that would take literally forever. The other thing is fraud. If humans are involved in counting the ballots, humans have biases. Like, oops, I dropped one, or oops, I didn't see that one. Does the machine care who wins? Again, assuming the machine wasn't rigged, right? Does the machine care who wins? No, the machine doesn't care at all, right? The machine will literally just count, give you a total number. Again, it should be very quick, and it's obviously going to be very accurate, right? So again, that is definitely the benefits of having machines involved in the voting process. Voting by mail. Now, I mentioned the idea of absentee voting. You do have the option to vote absentee, but there is one state that is the only option. They don't even have an election day. They just simply mail you a ballot 30 days before the election. You fill it out and you just simply mail it back in. All right, so that is the state of Oregon. And again, there's definitely some positives about that, right? You don't have to plan on going out. You don't have to hire people to run the polling places. You don't have to remember like, oh, here's where I go to vote or here's where I go to vote. They literally just mail you a ballot. You have an entire month to fill it out. You turn it back in. So again, I do think there are some positives there. Now, the downside would potentially be, again, you're putting your ballot either in a drop box or you're putting your ballot in the mailbox and hoping it gets back there. Again, what if it gets lost? What if it gets damaged? What if you have some like crazy postal worker who like throws your ballot away because they don't like you? Like there could be some potential issues there. The only other potential downside is when you vote, again, no one knows how you vote. But if you vote and then you put your return address on the ballot and you give it in, like theoretically, yeah, someone would see how you voted. Now, again, are the people opening up those ballots, do they really care how you vote? No. But if you do value the idea of like 100% secrecy, then yeah, the 100% secrecy part does go away to some extent because, again, you had to put it in an envelope with your return address on and then mail it in. Someone obviously saw the envelope. They pulled your ballot out of the envelope. They can kind of see how you voted. So again, is it a big deal? I wouldn't think so. I wouldn't really care. I kind of like this idea. But again, the downside also could be like maybe it costs a lot of money if you're mailing out thousands of ballots or millions of ballots. So again, some pros and cons there. All right. Now, more modernly, right, the options are that they just have you touch like a touch screen. So you go in there, instead of like giving you a paper ballot and a booth, they still give you the booth, but inside your booth is a touchscreen. And they give you that little plastic voter access card. You put that in the side of your machine, all right? Then it pops up with your ballot. And again, you just go through. You can see this is an office group ballot. So A, this is me taking pictures of me voting one time. B, you're not really supposed to take pictures when you're voting. So shh, don't tell anyone. Okay, so a couple things, right? You can see it's an office group ballot. It says who's running for the member of the state central committee, right? Who's running for senator? Who's running for, you'll notice there's not a lot of people running here. It was a primary, so there weren't a ton of options. All right, then you see the middle picture, the smaller one is like, this would have been the 2020 Republican primary that I voted in. So these were all the Republicans that were running for president. Obviously, we see Trump's name there on the list. He eventually wins. So again, you go through, you can see there were 6 pages of this too. So if you look at that picture right there, it says 4 or 6 pages. So again, you go through your pages, boom, boom, boom. Do you need to vote for everything? No. Vote for the things you're happy with. Don't vote for things you don't care about, especially if there's only one person on there. Does it really matter if you voted for Randy Gardner? No, it wouldn't even make a difference. He was going to win anyways. So again, you go through, you vote for what you want to vote. When it's done, it'll say, here's all the things you voted for. Are you sure that this is what you wanted? You hit yes. It spits that little card back out, and that's what you hand in. So again, when you walk through that room, all you're carrying is that card. Like no one has any idea what information is on the card. You give them the card. They put the card in a computer, and that computer just tabulates all the votes throughout the day. So again, if tens of thousands of people show up there, again, they just turn those cards in. The machine just counts up all of the information on those cards. So again, it is fast. It is simple. You don't have to worry about like printing things or what language. You can actually change the language of the ballot, which is super nice if you're not an English primary person. The downside is, and the thing that I would say makes me like 1% nervous as a voter is I have no idea what's on that card. Like when I filled out a ballot, like I knew I marked Timmy, I marked Johnny, I marked Sally, I turned that ballot in. I have to assume that what I put on that machine is on that card. Now, again, I have no reason to believe that there's anything faulty or misleading about that. But again, as a voter, maybe there's like 1% of me that I get a little bit nervous on when it comes to that front. Now, obviously, if we're talking about ways to modernize voting, the ultimate step in this would be some kind of online voting. There have been some states that have played around with this with like smaller local elections. Nobody's ever done it for like a major election or anything of that nature. So again, would online voting be good or bad? And obviously there's pros and cons, right? I think one, for you young people, I think it would be good. You guys are literally on your phones all the time. You're taking an online class right now. Like, you would be able to access that ballot. And while we maybe like to say, well, obviously everyone has the internet, well, that's not true. And I think that's one of the cons, right? Is not everyone does have the internet. When you get into poorer demographics or you get into older demographics, those people aren't necessarily going to have the internet. The other potential downside of something like online voting is the idea of fraud or hacking or accuracy. We said that's what it needs to be, right? You need to be free, right? So if you start saying, well, you have to have the internet to vote, well, you're kind of not making it free anymore, right? The honest and the accurate part. And again, that obviously comes into play with the internet. So again, is it a feasible option for the future? It might be, right? We might get to a point where technology is good enough to allow this to be the case, because I think it would be a really easy and quick way to get people to vote. All right, so one last thing I want to point out. It would seem really easy to vote. It would seem really easy to make a ballot, right? You simply, here's who's run here's the job, here's who's running for the job. This seems pretty straightforward. But I want to give you an example of when a ballot really messed things up. So if we go all the way back to 2000, the presidential election was between George Bush and Al Gore. And everyone's voting. It ends up coming down to just the state of Florida. Whoever gets the most votes in Florida will be the next president of the United States. Okay, well, this seems pretty straightforward, right? We count up all the ballots in Florida. But there's an issue. Some, and again, this is not all because every county is slightly different. Some of the counties in Florida were using a certain type of ballot, and it led to an issue called a hanging chad. So let me show you the ballot and why there's a problem. Okay, so this is the ballot, right? So what it was a booklet. You opened up the booklet. You saw names on the left, names on the right. Now, down the middle where those black circles are, your job was to literally poke a hole in the paper. So they didn't give you like a pencil. They literally just gave you like a little metal stick, and you would poke a hole. And then those papers would get fed through a machine, and the machine could read where the holes were, and that's how it tallied the votes. Okay, so again, kind of like a Scantron, except you're poking a hole instead of coloring it in. Okay, so people get their ballot, they open it up, they go down here, because so they can see Republican, George Bush is the first one, Democrat, Al Gore is the second one. So boom, you find the second black dot, you poke a hole in your paper. But there's a problem. If you poked a hole in the second black dot, who did you actually vote for? Well, you technically voted for Pat Buchanan. And what we saw is that counties that were using this tended to have really high votes for Pat Buchanan. Nobody was voting for Pat Buchanan in that election, right? Like, Pat Buchanan's mom wasn't voting for Pat Buchanan. So, like, clearly those people were trying to vote for Al Gore. But I can't say clearly. I don't know them. I can't speak for them. But it's probably likely that they were trying to vote for Al Gore, but accidentally voted for Pat Buchanan. Then it got more complicated because some people were like, little poke Pat Buchanan, and they're like, oh, crap, wrong one. Then bigger poke Al Gore. So now their ballot had two holes in it. Again, could I assume that the bigger hole was who they were trying to vote for? Sure, but should I make assumptions when it comes to voting? I don't know, maybe not. So there was this giant controversy about which ballots to count, which ballots not to count, who designed these ballots. The design of the ballot in and of itself is just stupid. So again, while it might seem pretty straightforward making ballots and having people vote, it can be a little bit complicated sometimes. Okay, so that's what I wanted to cover in today's video. Again, as always, if you have questions, let me know. Have a great day.